My name is Ilham. My registration number is A1M219042.
My name is Hamur Subanto. My registration number is A1M219040.
I'm Masrudin. My student ID number is A1M219046.
My name is Melinda and my registration number is A1M219048.
My name is Nur Jaya. My official number is A1M219056.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ilham. My registration number is A1M219042. So I will explain about Synchronic Psycholinguistic 1. Synchronic Psycholinguistic 1 Microstructure. Speech communities are kind into system of social organization by the transfer of messages over interpersonal communication channels. These channels are made up of a number of different bands over which message can move synchronously. There is, of course, the focal auditory band, which couple movement of vocal muscles with stimulation of auditory receptors. It is axiomatic that speech is independent of a like source, which is one of the great advantages over most other avenues of communication. There is also a gestural visual band which couples movement of facial and body muscle with stimulation of visual receptors. Interpersonal messages in every communication travel stimulation over these auditory and visual avenues, typically reinforcing one another but occasionally being in contrast for certain purpose. Other sensory modalities such as smell, touch, taste, and temperature may participate in communication certain do with other species. And the remarkable fact of there is finally what we may call the manipulated situational band, which via the mediation of things that the endurer manipulated and the decorer observers also couples the two. In this chapter, we explain both organization within these bands and interaction between them. The result is essentially the outline of a broad area and serve to each the gaps that exist in our imperial knowledge. Within band organization, each of the band in the interpersonal channel can be studied internally to determine the organization. To that extent, is its coding discrete or continuous? To what extent arbitrary in terms of learned social agreements, of natural in terms of biological necessities? What is the organization of structure of the code? What classes of the event have common significance and reflect common intentions, like allophones? How do the continuously code signal interact within these sectorally code signals? Questions of this sort have been asked and answered in some detail for the vocal auditory band. Since this is the central area of operation of a structural linguistic, a little work has been done in the gestural visual band. as we shall see, but practically nothing in the other bands. We shall therefore use work that has been done on the focal auditory band as a model for potential application elsewhere. The focal auditory band, the study of synchronic bands as a psycholinguistic problem, cannot fruitfully begin on the global level depicted above. Here we resist our attention to information carried within the auditory band. The organization of synchronous band within the auditory channel is not itself well understood. Some of the variables are, of course, linguistic in the narrow sense building of distinctive feature and hierarchy of the configurational feature which contribute to the formal aspects of the message. The auditory channel also includes the variable which convey information as to the code being used, social relation between the communications, their geographic origin and psycholinguistic stress states, and their effervescence, emotional attitudes. These variables are sometimes called voice qualifiers. Voice qualifiers. So the next material will be continued by my friend. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
My name is Hamur Subanto. My registration number is A1M219040. Research proposal definition of non-linguistic features and correlated variation in the sound of material. The experimental situation here requires elimination of all communication bands other than the vocal auditory. This can be accomplished by having subjects speak through scenes in the dark over the radio or onto tape recordings. The latter recommends itself as permitting the most control-delayed uses of the material and sampling of the most natural situation. The experimental situation also requires deliberate variation in the psychological, emotional, social, and other characteristics of speakers that are assumed to be transmitted as information by non-linguistic features. The general proposal below is to A. Obtain judgments as to these characteristics of speakers from representative hearers based on tape recordings and correlate them with observable features in sound material, and then B. Experimentally vary what seem to be the relevant features on a series of tapes and see if in fact these variations are accompanied by changes in the judgments presumably dependent on them. A. Record the conversation of individuals in natural encounter, as in someone's office, in role-playing situations, in therapy session, and fourth. B. Having obtained evidence in A as to what variables in the sound material seem to function as cues for such judgment, it should be then possible to introduce electronic modifications in samples of the same speech with which alter certain of these variables. Systematically, at least, those variables which can be so modified if our identifications are valid. then the consistency and extremeness of judgment about, say, anger should be continuously variable by modifying, say, pitch, amplitude, and rate of speech in some combination. There is a considerable body of research already available which will guide and sharpen experiments on this problem. And the next theme is linguistic organization. Early students of language describe speech sounds as similar if they gave the impression of similarity. If they were perceived as a similar, such judgments are influenced by the physical characteristics of sound, but also by the perceptual characteristic of hearers. More recently, phoneticians have defined speech sound similarity in terms of either spectrographic analysis, acoustical phonetics, or precision of the articulatory organs, or motor phonetics. In this section, we suggest a general logic and procedure that may be applicable to analyze the internal structure of any band of human communication, even though it is discussed here in relation to linguistic sound material. And that's all from me. Thank you very much, and bye.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I'm Masrudin. My student ID number is A1M219046. In this video, I will continue my friend's explanation about the gestural visual band. Okay, let's start with the first, kinetic. Okay, we can see the definition on the screen. The word kinetic comes from the root word kinesis, which means movement, and refers to the study of hand, body, and face movements. So especially this section will outline the use of gesture and movements, such as eye contact and then facial expression as nonverbal communication. Kinesics is the nonverbal behavior related to movement, either of any part of the body or the body as a whole. In short, all communicative body movements are generally classified as kinesic. Okay, next. Okay, types of kinesics. There are basically 5 different types of kinesic, such as emblems, and then regulators, illustrators, affective displays, and adapters. Okay, let's see the first type. Emblem. So here's the definition. Emblem are nonverbal signals with a verbal equivalent. Emblems are easily identified because they are frequently used in specific contexts. So, a person that receives the gesture or emblems immediately know or understand what it means. For example, there are 3 pictures. Okay gesture, like this. Or sign or ring gesture is formed by connecting the thumb and the index on the circle and holding the other finger straight or relaxed away from the palm. So commonly used by divers. Okay, used by divers and signified like I'm okay or are you okay when underwater. But in most English-speaking countries, it denotes approval, agreement, and that is as well or okay. And then the second is the V sign, like this. Okay, V sign is a hand gesture in which the index and the middle fingers are raised in pattern to make a V shape, while the other fingers are clenched. It has various meaning depending on the circumstance on how it presented. But the more widespread as used as a victory, V for victory sign. Okay, next let's move to the second type of kinestic, regulators. Okay, regulators are non-verbal signs that regulate, modulate, and maintain the flow of speech during a conversation. They are often used as a feedback to find out if one is clear of the instruction that given or the audience is interested in the speech. Different cultures use different forms of regulator to show confusion or understanding of a certain information. Regulator may also modulate the flow of speech when someone who wishes to interrupt with a point. For example, he or she raises up his or her hand to indicate that she or he has something to say. And then another example include putting the hand up to signal that you are ready to speak. This putting hands up, and then putting the finger up to your mouth to bring silence like this, and then rolling the eyes to showing disapproval, like rolling your eyes, and then a gasp to show shock. Okay, that's for regulators. Okay, next let's move to the third example of kinesics, illustrators. You can see the definition on the screen. Illustrators are used more consistently to illustrate what is being said. So like you illustrate what you are saying. And then illustrators are the most common type of gesture and are used to illustrate the verbal message they accompany. For example, use hand gesture to indicate the size or the shape of an object. For example, like when you're looking for a book and then you ask your friends, "Hey, did you see my grammar book?" And then she answered, "I don't think so." And then she asks you again, like, "How thick is that book?" And then you answer, "I think like this, about this thick." Okay, see another example, like "Call me," like this. You use a gesture to illustrate what you are saying, like "Call me," and then like "We're late. What time is it? You're late." That's the example. But unlike the emblems, illustrators don't typically have meaning on their own and are used more subconsciously than emblems. Okay, next let's move to the fourth type of kinesics, affective display. Okay, affect displays are the verbal and non-verbal displays about affect or emotions. So this display can be through facial expression, and then gesture and body language, volume and tone of voice, and then laughing, crying, and another type of emotion. Affect displays also can be altered or fake. So like one may appear in one way. For example, like you smiling when you sad. Okay. Affect can be negative and positive. Like smiling, laughing, and then thankful, joy is termed positive affect, while sadness, anger, jealousy, and then loneliness is termed negative affect. Okay, next let's move to the last type of kinesics, adapters. Adapters are movement or gesture that are used to manage our feelings or control our responses. So it includes movement done to improve comfort and reduce stress, and often happen at such a low level. So like they usually escape from our awareness. Then adapters principally comprise body focus movements such as rubbing, touching, and then scratching, and so on. For example, shifting body and or feet position when sit. Okay, we shift our body position when we sit. We cross our legs and then fix our color with and adjusting our tie. That's the example of adapters. Okay, it's all about the 5 types of kinesics, emblems, and then regulators, and illustrators, effective display, and adapters. Explanation about the gestural visual band. So please forgive me if I made some mistake. Thank you for watching. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Goodbye and see you in the next video.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Melinda and my registration number is A1M219048. Okay, I'm from group 4 and I want to explain about our materials. Is about the sequential organizations of linguistic event, and in these materials contain within band organizations and between band organizations, because my friends already told you about within band organizations, so my part just on between band organizations. Between band organizations, the nations that there can be synchronic redundancy among simultaneous event within the same band or between bands is less familiar but equally reasonable, and also can redundancy between directly and continuously code signals in the vocal auditory bands. Witness how stress is typically vowels, how stress and rise pitch tend to go together, and so forth, and informal observations indicates at least 2 types of relations between communication band accompanied by lengthening of vowels. In between band organizations, there are synchronic complementations and the second, synchronic conflict. In synchronic complementation is the usual situation in which gestural signals have the same significance as the vocal signals and hence complement one another. In synchronic complementations is contents between band complementations between the vocal auditory channel and the visible gestures of the speech apparatus itself. The fact that people can learn to read lips with high proficiency testifies to this. And synchronic complementations is similar. Synchronic redundancy can be observed between the situational band and the vocal auditory band. The psychological basis for complementations between bands seems to be quiet, simple, and apparent. And the second, synchronic conflict. Synchronic conflict is the more informational situation in which gestural and vocal signals have different significance and hence change each other in some fashions. And in synchronic conflict, there are direct contrast. Direct contrast is one of the standard phenomena of sensory psychology, is that of intensifications by contrast. In direct contrast, I give you some example. First is a patch of black cloth looks even blacker when set against a field of white. Second, a bit of yellow becomes more deeply saturated when seen against blue. The last one, a man of ordinary height looks dwarfed when standing with the members of basketball team. So all of the example, in this case, contrast is maximal when the figure and ground are directly opposite in quality. In synchronic conflict, it's also have irrelevant. Irrelevant is it is possible, also immediately difficult in normal person to produce gestural or facial signs which are simply unrelated to the intonations and underlying verbal encoding. Okay, example. A person may grimace and repeatedly clench his hands while saying, "Oh, we had an interesting trip to New York. Saw a new show and booked some clothes we really needed." So, in this case, the decoder this is evidence of conflict in the encoder is one of set of meaning where directing one encoding system while another were directing the other, and this of course is one of the clues used by psychiatrists is diagnosing dissociation. So the other effect upon the decoder is probably to dilute or make ambiguous the significance of what is being said. Okay, I think that's enough from me. If I have mistake, I'm sorry. So the next material will be continued by my friends. So I close by saying wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Jaya. My official number is A1M219046. I will explain about suppression. The encoder may completely eliminate information via either the vocal auditory or the gestural visual band. In the former case, we say the person is being secretive, is daydreaming, or has something on his mind. In other words, we interpret his gestural display as indicative of active mediational states and interpret his general mood therefore. The association of gestural and vocal signs with common mediators in decoding and the association of these common mediators with equivalent gestural and vocal acts in encoding provides a psychological basis for synchronic complementation as the normal situation in interpersonal communication. Conflict between vocal and gestural bands, whether in the form of contrast, irrelevance, or suppression, necessarily involves some degree of potential confusion on the part of the decoder. For normal communicators, therefore, production of interpretation of such effects as sarcasm and irony, deliberate irrelevance, and band suppression implies a certain degree of intelligence, greater discrimination among overt responses or among mediators is required. In this connection, it is interesting that the only coded type of dissociation between bands is that of direct contrast or opposition, as found in irony and sarcasm. It is as though only the complete flip-flop from one direction to its direct opposite in all or nothing fashion can be readily handled, not the parallel here with tendencies in languages to select binary oppositions in phonemic signals. The synchronic conflicts introduced by abnormal psychological disturbances may involve irrelevance and suppression, but probably not intentional contrast, and clearly indicate underlying conflict. Synchronic interactions will depend upon whether encoding or decoding is being studied. A. Encoding. Here one might study the relative difficulties of deliberately acting out instructions which involve incomplementation, contrast, irrelevance, and suppression. Presumably, complementation will be the easiest, most normal task and intentional irrelevance the most difficult. Another research direction would be to experimentally produce states of motivation and emotion in which complementation, contrast, and so on are relevant, and study encoding with intelligence, for example, as a variable. B. Decoding. Here one immediately thinks of sound motion movie recording as the basic technique, with cutting, splicing, and elimination of bands as mean of experimental manipulation. In producing the original materials, one could use either trained actors, in which case a specific series of intentional states could be expressed and recorded, with or without situational context, or set up experimental situations with untrained and unknowing actors. The general procedure might be to present the record materials under various experimental conditions and record judgments from decoders as to their interpretations of encoder intentional states. One experimental treatment will be to successfully eliminate bands of information enhancement of effects or mere redundancy. Another experimental treatment, particularly with a series of particular emotional states acted out by trained actors, would be to deliberately change the normal between band complementation. One could, for example, have the words originally accompanying a joyful gestural pattern occur with a graded series of other gestural patterns, including that for gloom, or one could vary the words accompanying a constant gestural pattern. In both of these cases, one would have to take care to use verbal materials whose automatic speaking gestures One would have to take care to use verbal materials whose automatic speaking gestures with sufficiently similar to each other. Judgment as to sarcasm, mental disturbance, secretiveness, and the like could be secured from the decoding subjects. Mental disturbance, secretiveness, and the like could be secured from the decoding subjects. I think it is enough from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.